Here's what's to come in this video. Watch me repot my largest Monstera, as well as take a tour of all the Monsteras in my collection. I reveal all my plant care secrets to grow happy, healthy Monsteras. This is how she started, my Monstera deliciosa years ago, and this is her today. I want to start by showing you guys the indicators for, well, for me anyway, that my Monstera needed repotting. So those browning tips basically tell me that the plant is not getting the hydration and nutrition that it needs. Even though there's signs that a new leaf is on the way, I know this plant is struggling and can do with some help. I've procrastinated so much that I actually have a secondary pot that you'll see better later that I've been redirecting aerial roots into. In preparation to start the repotting process, I pulled her out of her home, I would say, and I just want you guys to have an appreciation of how large she is. It's about 5 feet tall and growing in two pots. I added the second pot to redirect the aerials just until I was able to find a nursery pot large enough to repot it into. And while too much time passed in between and I forgot about it, and then the visual cues came from the browning tips and curling leaves. In general, I never rush to repot plants. However, what I use as my indicator is a reduction in the leaf size of the newest leaf emerging or stunted growth, meaning no new leaves have come out within like a couple months. In this case, though, I waited way too long and allowed browning to happen. This is footage of me a couple months before redirecting the aerial roots into that secondary pot. My thinking behind it was all in all to allow the plant to absorb more moisture and nutrients to hopefully live a happier, healthier life, push bigger leaves, and continue to enjoy good health. However, I find monsteras to be way more fickle than, let's say, philodendrons, in my care anyway, and are quick to communicate that by browning. From propagating monsteras in the past, I know that sticking aerials into soil allows for soil roots to grow, and this allows for more efficient nutrient uptake in general for the plant. However, in hindsight, this was when I should have repotted. But anyway, here we are today, a couple months after. So the takeaway from that is if you find your aerials are out of control, please check your pot because you might find this matted roots that I'm going to have to untangle and try and salvage as much as I can. I mean, I don't think that's necessary though. From research that I found on the internet, root pruning is quite healthy for your plant. So I figure, like, why not? Maybe next time I won't untangle it. But in this video or in this repotting, I did untangle it and try to salvage as much as I could. Left in its cover pot were a ton of ants. They were all over. This is the size pot that I'm going to upgrade it to. I'm thinking the network of roots that it has grown in both pots should have sufficient space to continue growing. It rooted well in the secondary pot, I must say, the aerial. So if you're ever, questioning if you can grow soil roots or propagate from aerials, you have seen proof of it there. But anyway, I'm going to try and untangle the matted roots now at the base of the primary pot and get the plant out of that one next. But first, let me make my Monstera mix using perlite, orchid bark, my premium aroid mix that I get from Utopia. I'll put all the information in the description. The orchid bark also has leca in it, some horticultural charcoal, the large chunks, it's fairly large bits in there. Sometimes I break it up into smaller bits, but considering the size pot I'm using, I won't be breaking that up, as well as biochar. I just eyeball the amounts that I use in each that you'll see later in this video. The goal is to just create a nutrient rich, well aerated soil. I decided to just make the mix in the pot that I'm going to repot into, as it was large enough to do all the mixing in, and then I could always dump some out to top off after. So I'm cutting open my Utopia Premium Aroid mix here. I intend to probably use about half bag at first and amend accordingly. So I'm just dumping it right into the pot. And then I'm going to add some perlite. The premium aroid mix already has perlite in it, and I intend to use a lot of chunky amendments as well as the biochar, so I didn't need much perlite here. Next, I'm gonna add some biochar. Again, I just eyeball this. This is the first time I'm using biochar in my mixes, so I was sparingly adding that. Then I added the horticultural charcoal, those large chunks as is. And finally, I'm gonna include the orchid mix. This has leca in it as well as terracotta, but if I see large bits of terracotta, I will take it out just to not make the pot super heavy. It's now three-quarter way filled, and I'm gonna mix it as best as I could to have an even distribution of all the amendments throughout the soil. This ensures proper drainage, a nice, well aerated mix that's also nutrient dense. Based on my watering manner, I prefer to have a well aerated mix, or some people might say I'm giving myself the headache of having to water more frequently, but I prefer to do that with monsteras just because I know that I am an overwaterer. So I make a super chunky mix. You'll see that I added the rest of the orchid mix into the batch that I previously mixed, and that is just me erring on the side of caution to avoid overwatering my monsteras, which leads to browning leaves again. So I'm just going to remove some of the mix here and just set that aside to top up when I'm done potting the plant into this pot. So my rule of thumb when I'm repotting plants is to just add soil mix to fill maybe one third of the pot that I'm going to pot into. You're going to see me pour a lot more of the mix out of the nursery pot. Remember, I was just using that to make the mix, just to contain everything. So now I'm just emptying it out to make room for the root zone of the existing plant. This is what I'm left with, and I'm gonna just put the plant right into that. I know you're frequently seeing me putting my gloves on and off. That's because I take it off to adjust the camera. I just want to make sure y'all can see exactly what I'm doing. So I'm starting to finally untangle the matted roots at the bottom of the pot itself. I know it's going to be a struggle to get this plant out of the pot, just being able to lift it with one hand, and it doesn't come out easily. I know I'm going to have a struggle taking it out. You just saw me take out a large rock as well. Sometimes I use that to stabilize the pole or to just stabilize whatever structure I'm using to support the plant onto. I also use Velcro strips frequently. Monsteras can get very, very heavy and topple over. So besides putting it into a concrete cover pot, I use multiple stakes and different items to stabilize it. Now it's already fighting me to come out of the pot if you didn't notice already. And that was the end of the fight. I finally got it out of the nursery pot, and the root ball is quite dense, and there are some new roots in there growing from the secondary pot, so I'm not going to disturb the primary root ball. I'm going to also try to tuck in as much new aerials into this big pot as I can, as well as make room for additional support for the plant, whether it's a stake I decide to use or another pole. Before I backfill, I try to put all supporting structures in so that when I do backfill, I can truly secure it. Sometimes I might put rocks in before I backfill just to stabilize the pole. In this case, I'm using this super tall stake. I'm going to make sure it gets all the way to the bottom of the pot. I got that stake from Home and Garden in Arangwes, and looking back at this footage, I actually put it in upside down. The cut edge should be in the pot. That actually makes it easier to insert. What I'm going to do next is remove this cocoa pole that it started to root into, but it really didn't continue to do so over time. So I don't see it necessary to maintain it in the new pot as well as the stake. So I took it out completely. I'm just going to mount the Monstera onto the stake to make sure it stays upright and is properly secured. I frequently use Velcro tape to secure it. And once I've determined the position of the plant, ensuring that the nodes are against the stake, I went ahead and backfilled. Because this monstera is so tall already, I really should see that I'm placing the stem against the stake and not the nodes. It has a ton of nodes at this point, being 5 feet tall. But the point is, you just want to secure it onto the stake as best as you can to keep it upright, to give it that sense of climbing. That way, the plant can access more light and the leaves should size up for you nicely. That leaf broke, unfortunately, during this repot, but it happens. I'm trying to do this by myself. And here is an example of me wedging a rock in. The rock is to help with stabilizing the stake even more. I was out of soil mix, so I had to make another batch. I'm using Orchiada fine grade bark here as I was out of orchid mix. You can also see the various components better and maybe be able, I'm hoping, to gauge the quantities. I'm really just eyeballing it to ensure that I have a well aerated mix that drains properly, but like I said before, still dense in nutrients. So my aroid mix is an organic mix. And well, I just added the regular perlite, and first time I'm using the rice hull again, which is supposed to be super for nutrition and just efficient nutrient uptake. This is the fine grade bark that I showed you. And finally, I'm just gonna top it off with this fresh mix, making sure all the roots are covered properly, but I'm not filling it like completely to the top. I like to leave about an inch, or maybe 3/4 inch from the soil line up, just so that when I'm watering, the water doesn't just flow right over. It gets a chance to percolate. So this is the top view. All the roots are covered, and that's it, I think. So these are just the brown spots again. That were the indicators of the monstera needing repotting. So this is it completed, and it just needs a watering now. Before I give it that watering, I decided to chop off all these brown bits. That's purely just a cosmetic adjustment, and I know it's taboo for some people, but for me, I just want to see green foliage. It really bothers me when I see the browning, so I just chop it off until the leaf pretty much falls off itself. But yeah, this is a final look again. Usually, my first watering after repotting contains great white mycorrhizae, but I had this at the new residence. I did not bring it with me, unfortunately. I forgot it, so I'm just going to thoroughly water it with just plain water here for now, and I will double back to add the great white later on. I really do believe in that product preventing shock and just making the roots pretty much comfortable in its new home. So I will double back to do that. As usual, I'll keep you guys posted on Instagram as to her progress after repotting so you can see if she is one big flop or if she actually progresses. The next phase for my Monstera deliciosa, which is this one you're seeing up on the screen, is to move her to my new residence. So I'm hoping she fares well with the move, and maybe I'll just make another YouTube video about it. But up next is the tour. To kick off this Monstera tour, I'm going to start with my Monstera Swedish Ghost. This is the rarest Monstera in my collection, and how I got it was a big fluke. So the story goes where I was shopping around for a Monstera Adansonii albo, and I was able to get my hands on a propagation. I saw the mother and everything, confirmed that it was an Adansonii albo. But upon propagating it, it seemed to have mutated into a Swedish ghost, to which others who have the same plant have confirmed that it is internationally. Its growing manner is one where the emergent leaf comes in fully white, like what you see up on the screen there, and then it actually fades into a minty green, and sometimes it actually turns fully green, like true leaf green. Other times it may remain mint, and other times it may remain white. So this one has a strange growing pattern. It's pretty unique. It started off as a one leafer, a one white leaf, and I just leave it to do its thing. It's in my standard Monstera mix, and I'll get into the care for maintaining variegation shortly. Next is my Monstera Borsigiana albo. I grew this one from a single node cutting and into node cutting. Actually, that was imported for me. It was bare root at the time. So I just constantly rooted it out and propagated it to create a bushy display to the point where I have three vines growing on one pole now. My primary focus when growing these first two, that's the Swedish Ghost as well as this Albo, is to preserve the variegation. I want to jump right into my tips for growing these two specifically. That's the Swedish Ghost as well as the Monstera Albo, alongside everything that you would have researched already or that's floating around on the internet about monsteras. What I have learned personally, just from my growing experience, are these four things that I didn't find on the internet. This is just from pure experimentation, and it's what is relevant to me and my growing manner. So just bear that in mind, that the points that I'm going to touch on is specific to my environment and just specific to my growing methodology. Firstly, never miss a watering. Use a moisture meter if you have to, if you're new to the hobby, just to understand the water retaining capacity of the soil mix that you're using, and never let it dry out. That's my number one tip. Just try and stay as consistent as possible with the watering to avoid browning. With highly variegated plants or abundantly white plants, they have a tendency to brown pretty quickly when they're under stress. Supplementing with silica as well as regular feeds, I found to be pretty useful to me in that I have like a 2 to 3 day grace period. If I underwater the plant, it's not going to respond negatively with browning immediately because it's getting sufficient nutrition. I do this every 2 weeks, and I have noticed on the dot, if I miss this, I get browning immediately. Overall, I think this makes the plant more resilient to stress, and it's definitely needed as its photosynthesizing capacity is way less than a fully green plant. Because the number one thing on the internet I found about monsteras was around overwatering and root rot, I always erred on the side of caution when in terms of watering. And in the early days, I would have used a moisture meter to make sure that I got my watering manner right with these. This brings me to my next point about using moss poles as compared to coco coir poles or just a wooden stake. I've learned that moss works best to root your nodes into, and I recommend rooting each node into the moss because, again, this allows for efficient nutrient uptake for these plants, and that is, to me, the best medium to mount this plant on, which loves to climb, is to root each node into moss so that it stays well hydrated and it has easy and sufficient access to nutrients to just keep it healthy and happy. Moving on to my Monstera Thai constellation, alongside everything that I've mentioned before in terms of care, I do practice it with this one, but I find this one to be way more forgiving. It's been such an easy grow for me in that, it's just such a rewarding plant. It is just not as fussy, possibly because the variegation is not albo. It's more like a creamish variegation, so that its photosynthesizing capability is a lot higher than the albos. So it's more forgiving and very, very rewarding based on the care regime that I described already, including having a well aerated mixer, which you would have seen at the beginning of this video. This one would only brown for me if it's time to repot. And like I said, I'm very, very negligent when it comes to repotting. I do take a long time, but that's the only time this one will brown. This is the newest leaf on my Tycon. I had to repot it because it started browning. I will show you guys coming up what the browning looks like. But having repotted it, I find this one doesn't really care to be on a moss pole. It's fine on a cocoa pole or even a steak. I just redirect the aerials into the pot so that it gains sufficient nutrients that way. But I just want to point out that difference between the Tycon and the first two that we discussed. This is the browning that basically told me it was ready for a repot. And while having done so, at the beginning of this clip, you would have seen that it was restored to its full potential. Moving along to the easier monsteras, I would say these next few coming up are super easy. They just grow like weeds. What you're going to see next here is my Monstera Adansonii mint variegata. This roots fine into a cocoa pole. It grows like a weed, very similar to just the Monstera Adansonii green form. You really have nothing to worry about this. It is super resilient. Again, you have been privy to my care regime in terms of feeds and supplements and, regular watering. These, I don't know, it just never browns. It doesn't seem to ever be stressed whether it's underwater or overwatered. It's such a joy. This is just a closer look at the variegation. What I would say about this is if I give it silica, the variegation is a lot brighter. So it may come out closer to a creamish white, not as white as the Swedish Ghost or the Albo, but it comes out brighter. In general, though, this variegation will fade to a darker green with the mint highlights. It really is a lot more stunning in person. It's hard for me to capture the variegation here on camera, but it's a type of a mottling or speckled variegation. Really, really beautiful. It is also a super fast grower, similar to the Adansonii green form that you're going to see next. So it grows really fast if you want like the easiest. I mean, this is really right up there with the Adansonii green form in my mind as the top two easiest monsteras in my collection. The mint and the Adansonii green really are no-brainers. And here it is, the Monstera Adansonii green form. I mistreat this plant more than I'd like to admit. It has been riddled with pest, not supported well, probably underwatered, overwatered, battered. It just wants to live. If you want a monstera that you don't have to think about, just get this Adansonii green form. You get the same beauty as the mint, and depending on how you want to grow it, whether you want to have a trail or up a pole, it propagates like super easily. Here's another one I have just flopped over doing its thing. It really is a no-brainer, and this is the last in my collection. And that's it for this video. I hope you were able to get some valuable information here, more so information that you don't frequently find online. I would love to chat with you in terms of what is your care regime for growing monsteras. I would love to try different things. I love experimenting and, of course, making videos for you guys so that we can discuss and just sort of compare notes. But thank you so much for watching. I really am happy to be back, and I'll see you guys in the next one.